Welcome to the Panza Panza Forum. In the Yoruba language, the word panza is usually injected into poetry to express an uncomfortable, uncensored, and inconvenient truth. The Panza Panza Forum is candid conversations about the life of African immigrants in America as it relates to their adaptation to their new home. While some may find it easy to integrate and can balance between retaining the original African culture while accepting the culture of their new home, many continue to struggle to find a balance between both worlds.
Hello and welcome to Panza Panza Live. This is a podcast where we discuss the lives of African immigrants and their assimilation into Western society as they raise younger generations in a country that is quite different from their own. We also explore the experiences of children of immigrants as they balance the African and Western cultures. We present to you this informative, interesting, and expansive dialogue about the intricate experiences of African immigrants in America.
Welcome to another episode of Pansa Pansa Podcast. This is the platform where we engage in deep conversations and the experiences, challenges, resilience of African immigrants navigating life in the diaspora. I'm your host, Kemi Seriki. Today's episode is part of a very special conversation exploring migration, identity, and the lived experiences of children of African immigrants. Originally, I was scheduled to be joined by two incredible guests, Dr. Kirstie Kwanteng and Dr. Rita Nketa, who were both doing powerful work at the intersection of diaspora, identity, and social changes. Unfortunately, Dr. Nketa is unable to join us today as she is under the weather, and we are wishing her a speedy recovery. I'm looking for her to have her join us in the future, really. And that being said, I'm very excited to be joined by Dr. Kirstie Kwanteng, a researcher, consultant, strategist whose work focuses on African migration and transnational experiences, particularly among children of immigrants. How the diaspora community engage across the border. She is also co-hosts the two known podcasts along with Dr. Nketa, where they explore identity, language loss, returning home, and how young Ghanaians in the diaspora are shaping the culture and redefining what it means to be Ghanaian abroad. Dr. Kwanteng, I'm really glad to have you join us today. I'd love to start by giving you space to introduce yourself and share a bit about your journey and what your project is about.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Kirstie Kwarteng. I'm based in London. I'm Ghanaian American. I was born and raised in the U.S. to two Ghanaian immigrant parents, and I moved to the U.K. in 2017 to pursue my doctorate at SOAS University of London, where I was in the Department of Development Studies. And my PhD looked at how children of Ghanaian immigrants in London, New York City, and those that had relocated to Accra were maintaining their connections to Ghana and as well as their connections to each other within their diaspora communities. And so it was my life experience growing up as a child of Ghanaian immigrants that inspired the topic for my dissertation. And it was called Sorry for My Left: The Transnational Practices and Identity Formation of Second Generation Ghanaians.
That's so beautiful. So as someone born in US to Ghanaian parents, you represent the second generation. Your research at SOAS. What is the SOAS stand for? What is it about your personal observation that drove you to that area of specialty?
Yes, so the school where I did my PhD, SOAS or SOAS as we call it, it stands for the School for Oriental and African Studies, but Oriental is not a word that we use anymore. It really means Asian. It's a school that focuses mainly on African and Asian studies, and that's why I wanted to do my PhD there. I wanted to be in a place that focused on the diaspora experience from people that were immigrants, because when we talk about the African diaspora, A lot of times, especially in the US context, people rightfully assume we're talking about the historic African diaspora, the diaspora that was created through the transatlantic slave trade. My experience was that of kind of what we call the more recent or contemporary diaspora, the diaspora that was created through immigration. Growing up as a child of Ghanaian immigrants, I mean, it was fun, right? I went to a, I went to a Ghanaian church, and I think it's that experience is really formative to me as it helped me form my identity as a Ghanaian born and raised outside of Ghana, because in those days, this was now the, 80s, early 90s that the church was, formed, and at the time, it was really, like, the only Ghanaian church in the area. This was in Maryland. I grew up, in Virginia. My family, we moved around quite a bit. We're now in Texas, but we started off in Northern Virginia, just in the DC area, and so at that time, that church was really the only Ghanaian church, and there also weren't, like, a lot of African markets at that time as well, so but we were worshiping, we were, in styles that were very similar to Ghanaian charismatic churches,
Mm.
um, and then after service, people would be selling food stuff, out of their car trunks, and because there weren't any, at that in that time, there weren't a lot of stores, and people needed yam, the people
Yeah.
needed the things that they needed to the plantain, the things that they needed to eat. So it was that experience that helped me really, helped me know that, like, yes, I'm born and raised in the US, but there's also this other place, even though I haven't been to, that I'm also from. And so as I kind of got older and wanted to engage with Ghana on my own, I had visited a few times with my family. Then I did an internship in Ghana. I was there for about 3.5 months when I was doing my master's. And that was my first time being in Ghana, like on my own, living there. And I think that's something, if it's possible, that's something I would really encourage all children of immigrants, regardless of where you're from, assuming it's safe, for you to go to your
Yes.
home. Really encourage you to do that. So just knowing how the reality of our experience as children of Ghanaian immigrants
Mhm.
versus how people were speaking about us. People were saying that we weren't connected, that we didn't care about home, we didn't want anything to do with, that we don't, that we're not interested in what's going on at home. And I knew that that wasn't true. And so the main argument I make in my dissertation is that our engagement is not like less than that of our parents, it's just different. And if we use, the same metrics as we like using to measure the first generation as we do the second generation, we're
Yeah.
going to miss out on a lot of a lot of information.
Wow. But who was telling you that you really not Ghanaian? Looking at you as if you are not actually from there.
Oh, it happens. It even happened just last week. Like it's something it's something that still happens, and it's something that causes a lot of tension for people who are, for children of Ghanaian immigrants, because people, they hear our accent and they just assume we don't know anything, or they assume that we've never been. Meanwhile, like I've done my PhD, I have a podcast, I have a whole, oral history archive about preserving Ghana's history. And I can say the same for my other friends who are doing a lot of great work in Ghana, connecting Ghana and the diaspora. There's just the perception that exists that we don't know anything, that we're not clued in, that we don't care, when in reality we're just doing it differently.
So they don't think that you're really connected, which is a lot of education is actually needed for many people in that aspect, to educate our people. Just because somebody was born out of the country does not mean they don't have that connection. And we have to welcome everybody. And not only in Ghana, it also happened in Nigeria, trying to battle between two worlds. And I know we're supposed to have Dr. Rita in Qatar today, but she couldn't join us. So both of you have an impressive collaboration, whereby you collaborate to as a co-host of the two known podcasts. How did you two meet, and what's made you realize that you needed to bring your expertise together to create something together, to create this podcast, the two known podcasts, two known, which is like a Ghanaian saying. Can you
Yes.
expand on that?
Yeah, so "to known" is kinda, it's a phrase that's used to describe someone that is being a know-it-all, or feels like they're they're a know-it-all, right? And a lot of times, kids who grow up in the diaspora can be called too known because we might be asking questions, too many questions, or wanting to know things we don't, that maybe in Ghanaian culture, it's not necessarily appropriate, or we don't need to know. And so because of that, we can be called too known for that. But then also it's also a play on the fact that Rita and I actually are too known on this subject because both of us did our PhDs on the experiences of second generation Ghanaians. I looked at the US, UK, and Ghana, and then Rita looked at Canada and Ghana because she is Ghanaian Canadian. She was born in Ghana and then moved to Canada when she was 18 months. And so I can't even remember how Rita and I met. We've been friends for a very long time. I think we saw, we're following each other's work online, and then I think we were connected through a mutual friend, and we've just been friends since. We were kind of, sisters in the struggle in regards to just doing a PhD, which is a very big undertaking, and then doing it on very similar subjects. We've been able to, support each other through our journeys, which has been really helpful. And so her and I we've always had conversations around things that we've seen going on in the diaspora, from things around identity to, the year of return, to all types of cultural things, economic things, anything that concerns Ghana and the diaspora. Like, her and I will be sending WhatsApp notes, WhatsApp voice notes to each other. And we were like, okay, maybe we can make a podcast so
Yeah.
we can share the knowledge that we've gained from our, as well as our own lived experience with people. We felt that it was important to, for us to share this information, to not keep it to ourselves, because we want people to be able to understand their experiences better. Because a lot of times people feel like it's only them that, people are saying they're not really Ghanaian, or it's only them that can't speak, a Ghanaian language. And it's not. This very, a lot of the things that we talk about are kind of part and parcel of the second generation Ghanaian experience. So that's why we wanted to make a podcast, to share the information, and so people can understand, their lived experiences better.
Wow. That's so beautiful. But is it a continuous podcast, or just for certain subject, and just certain episode and you are done with it?
So for now, we're keeping it as a limited series. We did get very good feedback though. So her and I are in conversations around what the next phase of the podcast could look like. But for now, it's a limited series of 5 episodes. And each episode is a different theme. We talk about ourselves, our backgrounds, our research. We speak with someone that's born and raised in the diaspora, and returned to Ghana to live, and has been living there for maybe 7 years or so now.
Mm.
And then we also interviewed 2 people who are actually not Ghanaian, but they are second generation. One is a second generation who was born in Zambia,
Oh,
but
wow.
is of Somali heritage, and another person who was a second generation Sudanese, but born and raised in the UAE. And
Mm.
we felt that it was important to show that there's a, diversity of experiences when we talk about second gen. It's not only Western countries. Like, when you talk about African diaspora,
Mhm.
you tend to think of the experiences of people in the US, UK, and Canada, which is where, that we did, the two of us did our research. But we wanted to remind people that most African migration occurs within the African continent. So there are very large African diaspora populations within Africa,
Mhm.
and also in the Gulf as well. About 25% of African migration outside of the continent is to the Gulf. So having someone that was born and raised in the UAE as a second gen was
Yeah,
important to us.
yeah, that would be very interesting for people to know what is it like, for people in UAE, their experience growing up in that kind of environment. How are they able to balance between two different cultures, maintaining their originality of African heritage, and then, being in that environment of UAE, whereby it could be something that people have to struggle to navigate. So I want to ask you, your research specifically compare the transnational experience of children of African immigrants in different countries, the UK, the US, and their relationship with Ghana. From your work, how does the immigrant experience differ for a child of Ghanaian growing up in London versus those growing up in Texas?
So one major difference was the impact of birthright citizenship, which I think is important to talk about, being that the Supreme Court in the US is currently hearing arguments around potentially ending birthright citizenship, which I think is bad for a variety of reasons. And so the UK ended birthright citizenship in the 80s. And the US currently has it, and God willing, we will continue to have it. And I found that the London participants, when they were talking about their British identities, they felt that it wasn't something that they could really access because they were Black. Like they were made to feel like they couldn't really say they were British because they're Black, which was interesting because there's kind of this idea that Englishness is for white people, but Britishness is multicultural. Anybody can be British. You don't have to be white to be British, but you do have to be white to be English. But the people that I interviewed were kind of saying that even though they felt British, people didn't really perceive them as being really British because they were Black and because they were of African heritage. So because of that, they were like, okay, well, I'm also Ghanaian. Let me try to lean a bit more into my Ghanaian identity. Versus in the US, people they talked a lot about racism. They knew, yes, like I'm of Ghanaian heritage, but I'm aware I'm Black in America. So I know racism is something that we have to deal with. But even with that, people said that no one can say that I'm not American because I was born here. That was a very common refrain that participants were saying. Like, yes, I'm aware I'm Ghanaian, and I love my heritage, but I was born and raised in the U.S. I'm American. No one can say that I'm not. No one can take that from me. So I thought that was a really interesting difference, and that highlights the importance of how immigration policies could shape the lives and the identities of children of immigrants.
That's quite interesting because I don't know, being that Ghana and Nigeria have a deep connection with British. Many of Nigerians and the Ghanaians during this colonization, even after independence, many went to school there, to school in Britain, and they have children there. I'm not sure they were not being denied of their citizenship at that time. Is this something that is new now or just recently?
So it was in the birthright citizenship ended in the 80s. I think I can't remember when year, but I know it was in the early 1980s, during Margaret Thatcher's time as prime minister, that that birthright citizenship ended, and it hasn't come back since then. So if you are born in the UK, that does not mean you are a UK citizen.
So is it that you have to live there for certain amount of years before you could be granted that you are a UK citizen?
As if you come, yeah, I mean, the immigration laws in this country are changing very rapidly. Even just recently, they've put out, they said the biggest changes to immigration policy in 50 years. They're trying to make it more difficult for people to get what they call indefinite leave to remain, which would be like the equivalent of a green card in the US, and then even more difficult to get citizenship, even more difficult to get asylum. So it is, I think, for people that are coming now that want to settle and get citizenship now, it is harder. I'm trying to remember. There are people that I interviewed whose parents were they were born, and it was wild to me because as an American, birthright citizenship is something that we
Yes.
well, at least that we held in great esteem. But currently that's changing. So interviewing second generation Ghanaians who were born and raised in the UK, but were technically like Ghanaian nationals until their parents could like apply for citizenship for them, because their parents were not citizens. Their parents were legal residents in the UK at the time they were born, but they were not citizens. So that means they themselves were also not UK citizens. They were Ghanaian. They were like Ghanaian nationals. And then when their parents were able to get citizenship, they were also then able to get citizenship for
That's quite interesting. Maybe US is trying to copy the same idea, but America is a country of immigrants compared to UK in terms of the way Europe was shaped is different from the way America was created. It's a country of immigrants, so it comes from another perspective of the way things are going to be done, even though Trump is trying to push that. And I don't think it's going to pass through Supreme Court.
I'm hoping it doesn't as well. It's really been the courts, from what I've been seeing and reading from other immigration experts, it's been the courts have really been the ones blocking a lot of the changes that the Trump administration is trying to push through regarding immigration. So I'm hoping and praying the Supreme Court can continue the continue the trend.
Wow. That's quite interesting. I understand. I was watching years ago a movie on Netflix of a man from Jamaica, whereby they had to deport him back to Jamaica, even though he's been living there for over 50, almost 60 years. And, when this new law came into place, they were deporting people. Immigration were picking people up in Britain and deporting them back to their different countries, especially those who came from different Caribbean countries.
Yes, yes, it's called the Windrush scandal. And so the Windrush was a boat that came from the Caribbean, I believe from Jamaica to the UK, because the after World War II, Europe, the UK was decimated. They needed people to come and help rebuild the country. So they told the Caribbean people, because at that time they were part of the British Empire, right? So
Yeah.
for them to come and work and help rebuild the country, and so they did. So in the same way, we talk about America being a country of immigrants, although it is, but also, we have to acknowledge the experiences of, Native Americans and the descendants of enslaved Africans. But in the UK as well, a lot of the healthcare, the Jamaicans or the Caribbean people who were coming and working in the National Health Service or the NHS, there's also a lot of immigrant labor that went into building the country. And so when the people came, they were viewed as, being of the empire, being citizens of the Commonwealth. And then as, independence came and things changed, there was, I mean, and I can't remember all of the details, but essentially, like, people's, like, records were lost, and so people that came as, who were considered citizens were then, like, not viewed as citizens, and so their descendants were
Yeah.
essentially not viewed as citizens, and it became a problem. So people who had spent most of their lives in the UK, who came to the UK legally, were all of a sudden viewed as not being here legally and were being deported.
It is sad that people who invested so much of their life from generation to generation, all of a sudden, you're going to deport them back to what? To start all over again, especially children born there or those who grew up there from a very young age to the country they don't even have, not, didn't grow up or have any connection with. That is very sad. And the same thing is happening in America, but through the Supreme Court, I hope and I pray it doesn't go through. So that's what. So now let's go back to talking about you growing up in two worlds. I want to take you back to the kitchen table. Paint a picture of us. What was it like growing up in a Ghanaian immigrant home? What was the unspoken rules? What were the aroma, the sound, the expectation like growing up in a Ghanaian home in America?
Oh, it was I have a lot of fond memories of my time growing up. So in my house, it was my parents and also my grandmother, my mother's mom, came when my mother was pregnant with me, and then she thought she would just be there for a little bit, but then she stayed for 12 years. And so, yeah, growing up, there's a mix of English and Tree in our that's the language my parents, my grandmother speaks. So we were hearing that. We're eating Ghanaian food, the jollof, the fried plantain, light soup, turmeric, like all those things were there. But then we were also eating American food as well, macaroni and cheese and spaghetti and meatballs and all those things. So I grew up acquiring a taste for both American and Ghanaian food. As I said earlier, our church was very important to us. So our faith, our Christian faith, was also very important to us. So grew up doing like family Bible study. I would have memories of my grandmother who she didn't speak English, but I have memories of her like reading her tree Bible in the morning and kind of like taking notes and all of that. And the church, since the church that we went to, as I said, being predominantly Ghanaian, There was what we call the grandma section, as a lot of people had brought their mothers from Ghana to help with child rearing. It wasn't just, thinking about my home. Yes, it was my parents, my younger sister, and our grandmother. At church, the wider Ghanaian community that we were a part of, there was, aunties. I didn't know who I was and wasn't related to, right? Because everyone is auntie and uncle. So I didn't know I didn't know that I wasn't a blood relative of some of the people that I was seeing on a weekly basis, because we were all family. Even today, like they still see me as their niece, as their daughter, really,
Yeah.
growing up in that community. And both of my parents also had their siblings living nearby or not too far away. So my dad's brother also attended the church that we were going to. So I spent a lot of time with his daughter and son, like our cousins. And then my mom, and then we have another one of my dad's brothers moved to the US from Italy, and he brought his, he so think about migration, right? Like some Ghanaians some will go to the US, some to Canada, some to the UK, some to Italy, some to Germany, right? So there's within our family there was some of that. So have an uncle who was in Italy, and he would come to visit, and then he eventually brought his family over from Italy, so got to know those cousins. And then my mom her sister was in New Jersey, which had a very very large Ghanaian population. Yeah, so we would on weekends drive up to New Jersey, just on a Friday, come back on a Sunday, and going to their church as well. Even when my aunt unfortunately passed away in 2019, there were people from the church that we would go to when I was a child that remembered my sister and I, and we also remember we also remembered them. So it was really community, like it was really about forming community, and living. Now that I'm older, and also as a researcher in this area now, I can see that they were forming, all these institutions, the church, their Ghanaian societies, all these things. It was about forming community in this, in this country that they're living in and they're trying to make a way in.
You're so lucky to have that, because not too many children have that sense of strong community, even though they might not, for example, they might not even be living around people from their same place. They might be from Nigeria, there's no other Nigerian, or they don't have other extended family to give them that kind of family bonding that you were able to be lucky to have. So whereby you have auntie, uncles, everybody actually raise you together. So you have that sense of connection of what we have at home as a community, raising the children together. Because
Yes.
okay, we ask you, how is school? If you get an A, they'll so okay, I'm gonna give you $2 there, $5. Okay, I'm gonna treat you to McDonald's. All those things have a very positive influence on a child, and you are so lucky to have that. But not too many of our people within our community, not too many of our children growing up in this country have that opportunity. To build on that, what would you say were the biggest struggle of being the child of an immigrant?
Ooh, well, a number one for myself, and I think a lot of other people, are the issues around language. Even though I grew up in a house where it was spoken all the time, like I said, my grandmother didn't speak English. My sister and I we didn't develop the ability to speak it ourselves. And this is because, from what my parents said, they were told by teachers to not speak to us in our language, because they felt that we would get confused and, that we would have difficulty learning in school. And of course, if you're an immigrant, especially a Black immigrant, you're already dealing with racism. You don't want to do anything that could possibly jeopardize your child's educational future. And so that's what they did. And I know, in hindsight, knowing, of course, hindsight is always 2020. Knowing what they know now, they of course would have done things differently. I don't know what it's like to move from a majority Black country to a place to the US, to the UK, wherever, where there's where you're judged, by your skin color, right? And people make assumptions about you because of that. And so I know our parents did what they had to do, what they felt like they had to do for us to survive and thrive in, the countries that they migrated to. But yeah, that's as I've gotten older and as I've spent more time in Ghana as an adult, it's something that I've been working on. I actually even On Friday, I went to a shop and the security guard was Ghanaian, and I didn't know and at first, but he saw me and he's like, "Oh, you're a Ghanaian." Like he could just tell that I was Ghanaian. So he started speaking to me in Tree, and I was able to like keep up okay. He didn't make fun of my accent or anything, but I'm sure I know like it's there. Like when try to speak my mother tongue, and I know I speak with an American accent. That just kind of is what it is. But I was proud of myself for being able to keep up in the conversation, and that's because of just years of practice and effort. I'm still not where I want to be, but I'm not where I was, so
Well,
I can be grateful for that.
you're doing well because I've heard many of these complain, and I'm so glad that you brought it up in such a way that you understand some of the struggle African parents are actually going through, trying to navigate the system, and then the way they want their children to progress, whereby they don't want anything to disturb their education. Teacher telling them, don't speak your language to your children because it's going to affect how they function in school, how they're going to progress in school academically, which is completely false. Because if you
Mhm.
look at the Latino children, they speak Spanish in America. If you look at some of these children who came from different European countries, their parents may be speaking Italian to them at home. They may be speaking Portuguese to get them at home, but that doesn't stop them from not understanding. Actually, to my understanding later on, because my children too, I have two children here, and growing up, I wasn't speaking Yoruba to them. I was just speaking English, but they understand when I'm speaking to someone in the language. They pick up one word or two words there. And that's why you see many of our children now, many of them are actually expanding to teach the language. They want to they want to learn Yoruba, they want to learn Twi. They're all online starting classes to learn the language, so to claim it back that nobody can take that away from them because that's part of their identity. And that's part of their culture, and they continue to embrace it, to empower themselves. That this is my background, nobody is going to take it away from me. To build on that, and I know some of this classical question that comes most of the time in terms of looking at the two different culture, this brings me to this question that you always have a different answer. Do you ever feel torn between the two culture? And if so, how did you navigate that balance in your daily life, being Ghanaian and also being American?
Yeah, it can be. I actually wrote. I should have shared it with you. I just wrote an op-ed for a Black British newspaper here that addressed this very question around how do we deal with um simultaneously embodying two cultures. And there can be, of course, there can be some tensions because the homes we grow up in are, reflective of the countries that our parents left. So like my parents were kind of, they recreated, Ghana in our house, but outside, things are culturally very different. Outside is America, right? So culturally, things are different. And expectations can be different. Language can be different. The names that that we are called can also be different. But I think it's actually more of a gift or a superpower being able to navigate different cultures. And I know at the in the world that we're in right now, DEI, multiculturalism, and all of that are kind of being frowned upon. But the reality is, like, we do live, like, our societies are multicultural, and it's to our benefit to understand how we can live and work, and play amongst each other in multicultural societies. So I think those of us who grew up like experiencing and living multicultural lives can be kind of at the forefront of these types of efforts. But it can take it's like years of negotiating and kind of wrestling like, oh, am I Ghanaian or am I American? And the answer is like I'm both, right? And identity can be situational depending on where I am or where I'm at, how I'm feeling. I can feel more, maybe more Ghanaian or more American. But even things like, like Tringlish, right? Like obviously the people mixing like the Ghana languages are Ganglish, because Ga's another, Ghanaian language.
Broken English.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So mixing the Ghanaian languages with English, I think is, I mean, I know it's done in Ghana before people come in and yell at me, but in the diaspora it's done as well because of, our inability to speak our languages fluently. So the small that we know we'll speak, and then we'll just mix some English inside. Well, new cultural aspects and things that are kind of being developed from this tension that is also a gift.
Yeah. And you're so right about that in terms of, balancing between both culture. I remember when I first started this, it wasn't a podcast before. Being that the job where I was working, I was coming across so many of African children getting into criminal justice system, and I didn't like what was going on. So I
Mm.
wanted to start a conversation to talk about the issue going on with a lot of African children. So I had a community conversation whereby, diversity of African children coming in to come and talk. I remember the first time I had this conversation, they said, oh, we're just going to stay here, about 6 or 7 of them with a lot of other audiences. We're just going to talk for like, maybe 1 hour. They didn't leave on the 3 hours later because they had so much to say. And actually, one of them who actually spoke at that time, who actually groundbreak everything, he said, I'm from Ghana, but my Ghanaian is inside. When I go outside, I'm black. When I come in, I drop the blackness and I become Ghanaian when I
Mhm.
come in through the door. Everything that you're doing outside, you keep it outside. When you come in, you are within the household. You have to follow the cultural belief system and everything, which is very powerful. And, in terms of how do we continue to communicate this to our children? So that brings me to the West, whether growing up in United States or children growing up in Canada or Europe, the issue of race and discrimination faced by people of color, whether institutionally or personal contact. But many African immigrants may not expect to experience this same treatment from other people of color as well. Because that conversation actually came to social media recently of one of a Nigerian, 2 of them were born in this country and they grown men now. They have a podcast called 154.
For Africa, yeah.
Yeah. So there was a conversation about the discrimination experienced by African and their children from other people of color in this country. So the topic came up a lot in the diaspora circle. Have you ever experienced teasing, experience of otherness or biases from other people of color? For example, when you were in America here, people even looking at your name, saying that, oh, you are not really from here. You are not black enough.
Yes, I mean, that is definitely something that has happened, getting called, African booty scratcher and all that stuff. And even in my research, that's something that came up quite a bit, where people talked about being made fun of for being African from other African Americans. But I know on the flip side, African Americans also feel that Africans and, children of African immigrants also make fun of them and say that they don't know their no, that they don't know where they're from and that they're all, like in jail or what are just like the
Yeah.
stereotypes. But that's essentially what these diaspora wars as they are called are about. We've all unfortunately believed and internalized the stereotypes that exist about the other group, not realizing at the end of the day are all black in the United States. And we are all dealing with racism and experiencing racism in interpersonal and systemic ways. So I personally, I don't, I know that there are some, since I'm, from the African immigrant community, I can really only speak more to that side. And I know that unfortunately there are some people in African immigrant communities and even children of African immigrants that that do, try to distance themselves from African Americans. And I'm like, we are all, like, we actually all are all black. Like, we are black. And because of that, there are things that we might experience. And so I don't think I don't like diaspora wars. They don't I can understand why they exist, but they shouldn't exist because all of us really are all Black.
Yeah,
All
it's so important what you just said. We're all Black, but we're also unique in a way. And
Yes.
respect each other's uniqueness. Not everybody has to relate to the way African do things or the way African American do things. Everybody is unique in their way. And we have to respect that of that uniqueness. So how did you process those experiences anyway? What helped you shape your sense of identity and belonging?
Being made fun of is never an enjoyable experience, but it wasn't my only experience. I mean, there were some students making fun of me for being of African heritage or being darker skinned, but it wasn't everybody. So people, when moments like that would happen, I would find other friends or teachers, whoever, to kind of encourage me into just yeah, and encouraging me to be who I am and reminding me that there wasn't anything wrong with, being dark skinned and being from a African heritage.
Yeah. And that's true. It shouldn't, So we just have to, and I'm so happy that many of our children are taking that pride in their African heritage, they claiming their identity. They're not gonna lose it just because, somebody may make fun of them wearing it with pride and say, yeah, my parents are from so country. I'm from multicultural environment and I really appreciate where my parents come from. So I want to talk to you about parenting and community, which I know you are also on social media. Social media is full of children of African immigrants
Mhm.
critiquing their parents. I love to talk about that parenting style. From your perspective, why do you think this conversation has become so prominent?
I think people are looking for ways to like we want to see our experiences. I think we want like some to experience some validity. We want to know that it isn't only us that had, our mothers waking us up very early to do prayer time or like like the experiences that we aren't alone in our experiences. And so I
Yeah.
think these kind of caricatures of African immigrant parents are so popular because they resonate with because they resonate with people so deeply, and people are happy to see like someone accurately portraying things like from their childhood that they felt were maybe only them. And even to be fair, even my parents, like some of my like elders in my community, they find those videos funny as well because I guess they know that these are the things that they the things that they do. But yeah, I think it's yeah, I think that's why. And I've actually noticed, like, it's been interesting seeing as, so I'm a millennial. And so I would say
Yeah.
like 10 years ago, I mean, it was kind of like the millennials were really the first ones to, use social media in this way as like using comedy to describe the children of African immigrant experience. But as our generation, we've gotten older, we're getting married, having children. Now seeing Gen Z is like the Gen Z comedians are now kind of having their turn in this space. And it's funny. Like and it's still funny. I guess as they say, more things change, the more they stay the same
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
things are still and these are probably, my parents migrated in the 70s and 80s. So Gen Z, um, these are probably children of African immigrants that migrated in the 90s and maybe early
Yeah. Yeah.
2000s, but things are still but
The same.
they're still the same. How the depictions are still very similar.
My children too, when they see some of the clips, they send it to me on social media. They say, "Oh, this sounds like you." I said, "I'm not that bad. Let's come." Or they say, "Wow, some of these parents are really something." I said, "Well, you see, I'm a little bit lenient when it comes to certain things. So, be grateful what you have." And one thing is that I could see, even when I see some of those videos and I look at the comments, you see some children who are from the Caribbean, they say, our parents are the same. Or those who are from Asia said, that's our parents too. They do the same thing. And I've seen some children who parents came from Europe. They said it's the same. If you go only if you know what is going on in people's home, then you find out that it's parents from certain generation, their
Mhm.
style of parenting is different from another generation. So it's for them to be able to understand that. So from your observation, how does parenting style, specifically the concept of community parenting, which I think you were so lucky to have
Mhm.
growing up, community parenting, whereby a child is raised by the village. Even though you were born here, you were raised by the village.
Absolutely.
From, your description, not many people have that opportunity. And, compared to more individualistic parenting style common in the West, what are the strength or the weakness of each approach?
I think the strengths, I'm thinking more about the parents. Like, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I can only assume, but like when you are raising children in community, it's a bit easier because there's more people to share the burden. So I know, like I said, my parents, they had my grandmother, and then even we had very close friends from our church that lived not too far from us. So they would, sometimes pick us up after school, and we would just, be there. And then when my parents closed from work, they would come and get us and, and take us home. So I think it's good to, and kind of sharing the burden. And for the kids, like, we get to know that there's so many adults in our lives that can support us, that if we have issues that we can go to, that are willing to feed us, cousins and like cousins, quote unquote, that we can, that we can play with. I think like looking back, it helps out because those relationships with the quote unquote aunties and uncles and my cousins and all of that are still really strong. And I guess I didn't know that. I guess to me, it doesn't feel like it's like a unique experience. But I guess it's a function of me growing up
Yeah.
where I did, of people that grew up maybe like in the Bronx, Atlanta, and in places where there's large Ghanaian or African immigrant communities. They might have had
Yeah.
similar experiences. Now, think about um the challenges. I know sometimes, especially as you get older and you kind of want to live your life, you can feel like you have too many people in your business, like you just kind of, want to go around freely. You want to date, you want to just, go to uni, just like relax a bit, and you'll have well-meaning, right? Or hopefully well-meaning, people in your community trying to give guidance that may or may not be helpful or even applicable to your situation. That can be a challenge.
Giving advice that I didn't ask you for that, or asking you question that you're not ready to answer.
Yes.
Uh-huh. And that comes from home also. You, as an adult, you understand how to hold back, and that is something that I had to learn here myself. Not everybody may need your advice. They may not want to hear what you have to say, and also being able to have a dialogue back and forth. Younger ones have a say, and then understanding from their point of view of things compared to how we grew up, whereby, whatever we tell you, that's exactly what you're going to do. And I want to talk a little bit about the projects you're working on. You created Nana Project, an archive dedicated to preserving the stories of Ghanaian elders. What inspired you to do this project?
So my grandmother, the one that lived with us, I was growing up, she passed away in 2007,
Mm.
and I was in university at the time. And that was so to backtrack a bit, when she left, I said that she had stayed with us till I was, for 12 years, so till I was 12. And when I was 12, she suffered a stroke,
Hmm.
and it was proving to be a bit difficult for my parents to manage her care, because at the time we had moved from the DC area where we had, a lot of community, to Long Island, New York, where we didn't have the care structures there in the same way. And so the family decided, like, my mother's siblings decided that it would be best for my grandmother to return to Ghana. Excuse me. And so when I was 12, my mother, my sister, and we all went with our grandma to return her to Ghana. And that was my first time, or both my sister and I. That was our first time going. And then she ended up passing away 7 years later. And so her funeral, she was 96 when she passed. 2007, the year that she passed, was also Ghana's 50th anniversary of independence. Yes. And so we were there, we were in our hometown. I hadn't been to our hometown before. This was the second time, only the second time at this point that I had gone to Ghana. And we would go to our hometown for the funeral. And I'm seeing Ghana at 50 flyers everywhere. I'm like, wow. So my grandmother, when Ghana became independent, my grandmother was 46, right? She died at 96, so almost like half a century under colonial rule, and the other half of Ghana being independent. Like, she must have seen and known so much. She must have experienced so much that we will now never know because nobody asked her
Mhm.
about, these things in her life. So I said, "Okay." And I kind of, held that for a while, for like some years, and it wasn't until 2013, 2014, I was like, "Okay, I think this is something that should be done." So I asked one of my cousins, my play cousins from when I was growing up to start this project with me, and that's how we got started.
Wow, that is so powerful what you're doing. Because, like you said, imagine if you had been able to interview her,
Mhm,
met her experience. What was it like living during the colonial time?
mhm,
How did the colonization took place? How did they even came in the first place?
mhm,
Because one thing that when you look at the map of Africa, history of how Ghana became Ghana, Nigeria became Nigeria. Before Berlin Conference, there was no Nigeria, no Ghana. All
mhm.
these places were different ethnic group, different empire, different people from different places, and they live among each other. And imagine if she would have been alive when you became aware and said, let me just interview her and get as much information as possible. But this is so powerful what you're doing because we need to document our own history. Because most of the history that we documenting came from the writings of the Europeans, what they found when they came. And
Mm.
a lot of time we refer to their writing of their own perspective of how they see things, not from how we see things ourselves. And your grandmother would have been a perfect candidate to give that details. But I'm so happy that you're doing that now. And I know that many people will be open to that conversation. So, and also I know, can you expand on why it is so important to preserve uh, history, African history in the diaspora?
Well, it's important because when you're so far removed from the place of heritage, it's harder for you to learn about your history. Because even, in America, even trying to learn about the history of the African Americans is getting harder, especially now that they're trying to erase anything that they feel like is DEI. So even people whose ancestors, have were in the country like 400 years ago
Mhm.
are having issues trying to find or it's not as is it's becoming harder to learn African American history. How much even more for those of us who do or who we're only one or two generations, maybe three generations in this country. So we need to ensure that we know the history of the places that know the history of the places that we're from so we can understand ourselves, understand our experiences, understand why migration even happened, how our diaspora communities were formed, because it's events that took place, at least in the case of Ghana, essentially there were a bunch of events that took place in the 80s that created kind of the perfect storm for Ghanaian emigration. I mean, people leaving Ghana. That's what, when that created the kind of the foundation for the Ghanaian diaspora as we know it today. And then also like our histories are interconnected with that of other places of African American history. Ghana history, of course, has a lot of intersections beyond the transatlantic slave trade. So I think in doing that and knowing our history, we can understand ourselves and our experiences better as African diaspora immigrant communities, and then we can also understand our relationship to African American and Caribbean people better as well.
That's so powerful. You also lead. I know we get into the. You also lead because you have so much you're doing. How much you get yourself into so many different mission, and I hope you have many of diaspora children who were born here or brought here at a very young age, pull them into this mission of what you're doing. So you also lead a diaspora trade and investment mission to Ghana in collaboration with African Foundation for Development. What did that initiative aim to accomplish?
Yeah, so that initiative was actually based on one of my research findings that found that, second generation Ghanaians are not really interested in sending remittances. They are more excuse me, they're more interested in investing or doing things that can have like longer term impact. but sometimes they're a bit hesitant to invest because they don't know who they can trust. And so I partnered with the African Foundation for Development here in the UK and the All Party Parliamentary Group for Ghana and SOAS, which is where I'm a research associate now. And we put together this diaspora trade and investment mission to Ghana to provide a structured pathway for people who are interested in well, specifically like second generation Africans who are interested in investing in home and wanting to learn more about how to do that. So we met with people in the policy space. We met with small businesses to learn more about the work they're doing, learn more about the opportunities, and on the policy side, learning more about what documents are needed? Like, how do I get a Ghana card? Like all those things that are important that you could kind of get information from when you're outside of Ghana, but the best way to really be in the know is to be on the ground and have face-to-face conversations with people. So that's what we wanted to do.
Oh, wow, that's so powerful. Thank you so much for that. So finally, on, final reflection, what gives you hope about the future of African in the diaspora?
Oh wow. Oh, well, that's such a beautiful question. What gives me hope? The fact that people are still yearning to connect with home, like, in spite of everything, and I think the internet has made it a bit easier, but there's still a desire for more. Like, people want to go and visit, they want to go and try to live, they want to learn their languages, like, in spite of everything, in spite of the racism that we are experiencing, in spite of being told that we're not Ghanaian or Nigerian enough or whatever, or even Black enough. People are still want to engage with home. They still want to see our homelands and the African continent overall succeed. We want to see Black people overall succeed, regardless of where their heritage lies. And so that gives me hope. The fact that people still care and are still working towards that goal of reconnection.
Thank you so much. That's so beautiful, Dr. Kirstie Kwanteng. I hope I'm calling your name right.
Kirstie Kwarteng.
Kirstie
Kirstie
Kwanteng.
Kwateng.
Dr. Kirstie, thank you so much, Dr. Kirstie Kwanteng. Thank you for your vulnerability, for your scholarship, for the work you are doing to archive the past, understand our present, and to build for our future. This is absolute essential conversation. I thank you so much for coming. So
Thank
let's
you for having me.
yeah. And to you, our listeners, thank you for being here, for being part of this conversation about identity, home, and what we carry with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate, review, follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with someone else who is navigating their own path between worlds. It helps our listeners to find us, to ensure that these important stories continue to be told. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, keep defining for yourself what home really means.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Ponzo Ponzo Live Podcast. We hope to have you back with us in the next episode as we continue to explore the nuances of the African immigrant experience. If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at talk@ponzoponzo.org. That is TALK@PANSAPANSA.org. And follow us on Instagram at pansa.pansaforum. Until next time, remember to spread kindness and love. Thank you and take care of yourself.